Hey, we're going to, thanks, Tom. That was fantastic. I mean, AMCOM is a tremendous command. Tough job. I hope you're keeping up with the monthly calls with the cabs. You know, that I know those were always really exciting. We're going to pull an audible. The schedule had us going to a break. So, Jim, if you want to bring your panel up and sit and assume your position. If you notice, so we're not going to take a break. We're going to go right into the next panel. But we do have cookies. So on your way out today, please take a cookie with you when you go. Otherwise, the staff here eats them and we get fat. Yeah, and they don't need them. So if you look at your calendar or your agenda, we had scheduled the Honorable Erin Conaton to be the moderator of this panel. Many of you know Erin. She's an AUSA Senior Fellow. She was Undersecretary of the Air Force, Acting Secretary of the Air Force, Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel. So, but she had an accident this morning and couldn't make it. So Jim, stepped into the breach and volunteered to act as a moderator. And General Myles, tremendous resume. Started with the crossing of the Delaware, as we heard earlier. Commanded AMCOM, former commander of AMCOM, Test and Evaluation Command, ADC of 1st Cavalry. Just a tremendous career in the Army, and then since as running his own business. So, Jim, over to you, and thanks for doing this for us. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thanks. I want to give thanks to AUSA and General Brown and General Smith and the leadership team here at AUSA. Having these forums is really important. Not so much to talk about the first mode of transportation that Ken Quinlan and I were ever on, but actually to have a serious discussion about some issues that are out there. These are some very important issues that we have. By the way, for the record, yes, I was on the boat with Ken Quinlan, but we did not have life preserver units. There was no such thing as a risk assessment, and we were studs back then. Just want you to know that. And we both did actually row on that boat. Okay, so we are going to talk about supply chain and some of the challenges that we talked about. Tom O'Connor mentioned how we provided support to the fight. And there's something called MET-T. We all know that's the truth. It's all about what's the mission, what's the enemy, what's the terrain look like. Okay, what about the time and the elements and the troops? That MET-T drives what we do, and the conditions are totally different. And all the things that we did to support won't work today. And you know what? That's okay, because quite frankly, if you think back to what we did, we were a division-based Army at the turn of the century. Something came up with 9/11, and we changed from a division-based Army to a brigade-based Army so we could support the soldiers in the fight. That's what we did. And now we have to transition back because the threat has changed. And with that comes, what does this thing look like? How are we going to fight? And supply chain is really a significant discussion. So along those lines, what we have is here, we got a great panel. And I want to start off with the program manager here for aviation mission systems and architecture. In the logistics management world, in the acquisition world, we always look at the program managers as trail bosses. They're the ones that go through the whole life cycle, and they're the ones that we always look to provide leadership guidance, and the ones that we thump on the chest when it's not going right. And we ask them to do incredible things when they don't even have ability to affect their own budget and their control. So we have Colonel Burr Miller, PM for Aviation Mission Systems and Architecture. We have Mr. Frank Vegerita, who is the G2 threat office branch for AMCOM. If you're going to talk supply chain in a contested environment, you probably ought to have rubber sheet some threat over the top of this discussion. And on for our contractor side, because we do nothing alone, we have Colonel Retired Bill Morris, who's the Executive Director for Army Programs for GE Aviation. And we have Ms. Dina Halvorsen, who is the Program Director for Sustainment for Sikorsky, all things Black Hawk. So that's our panel. And of course, you got myself as a moderator. And I'm just going to talk briefly, and then go. We're going to start from Burr and work out from the tactical side. But I mentioned MET-T, and this is about a different fight, and this is about long distances, as Tom O'Connor talked about, which causes delays in parts. Where's our and what are the? It calls for extension of maintenance intervals. How we're going to maintain. It talks about what our combat operations duration is going to be. We're not sure. Could it be a violent short fight, or could it be a long extended fight? The answer is yes. And so that causes Mac McCurry to start thinking about this in a very, very short time frame to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing. Offshore supply chain reliability is another piece to this that we talk about, with the reliability of are we going to get the supply chain that we supplies that we need from the traditional places that we go. So with that, I want to turn this over to Colonel Miller and let him talk to you about it from his perspective and what he sees, and we'll go down the line. Go ahead, Burr.
There we go. All right. So on behalf of my boss, Major General Rob Berry, we appreciate the opportunity to engage with the AUSA. So PU Aviation, in conjunction with our industry partners, provide capability via mission platforms and platform capability upgrades to meet Army requirements. Operationally, the PEO PMs build up the airframes and the mission capability programs through robust supply chain activities. Without a functioning and responsive supply chain system, we cannot execute our mission. Recent congested supply chain concerns and the after effects of COVID on the global supply chain continue to increase that risk to the PEO mission. So just some very specific examples from my seat. So chip shortages that we're experiencing have driven asset procurements from months to years out in the field. And what are the impacts of that to the PMs and the PEO? Most of our programs are designed and developed to meet a specific target at a specific capability requirement for the Army within a budget cycle. And when we get chip shortages that go from months to years, either with the government or with our industry partners, it moves that window out for when we can apply those capability upgrades to the mission series. It also increases our schedule and increases the risk on the program, as well as often creates a budget delta on the left side of the palm for us. So in the long term, especially with the COVID global challenges that are out there, we're often hearing back from our industry partners that it's very difficult to get the parts and pieces that we need that put together to build our capability for Army aviation. So just quickly, what is PO Aviation doing in this kind of contested and difficult environment? Holistically, we're taking a baseline assessment of industry to a level we've never really done before. A lot of programs and PEOs, the relationships with the vendors, we work in collaboration through contracts. They go out and they source the supplies through the supply chain needed for different things. But now we're getting to the challenge where there's not enough out there, and so we have to make decisions together. So the PEO holistically is starting to develop databases to kind of look at where the challenge areas are, where we see in supply chain things, and how are they impacting the buildup of fleets or mission series in the PEO. We're also looking at foreign influence assessments. So as we talk with our G2 counterparts down in the SCIF, we have to be careful, because when there's a shortage of parts out there, everybody's competing for them. And so sometimes we have to make sure that those parts are secure, because where are they coming from out in the global environment, and making sure that things are not being added to those parts that then get built into our systems later on. Also communications with our vendors. We're really having to have really open communications with our vendors about supply chain shortages and what the effects are in programmatics that we do within the programs. Looking at how we balance the risk, not only to industry, but also to the government, and coming up with some very creative solutions on how to go after it. So things that we traditionally don't do, buying long lead items for parts in boxes, where we traditionally only buy for major sub systems. And then finally, just kind of also making sure that we are in direct coordination and alignment with our sustainment partners, who are also sharing the same experience with us, especially when we transition a product from the PM shop to our sustainment partners, and make sure that it comes with a robust opportunity for them to not get caught short for supply chain charges. So a lot going on in this area of PO Aviation, and look forward to any questions you have from me as we go on. Thanks, sir.
Okay, now we'll hear from Frank from the AMCOM G2.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, General O'Connor, for inviting the Intel guy out of the basement to come out to DC and brief you guys today. So thank you. Intelligence support to supply chain it's emerged to be a priority in the within the acquisition community. As General Myles said earlier, the environment has changed considerably, and supply chain is now in the forefront, particularly in acquisition. Fortunately, the program offices within the PEOs that we deal with at AMCOM want to engage early with their intelligence support, which is very good for us as intelligence professionals, because generally, a lot of times we'll go into a PEO and we have a ton of intel, and we generally are the bearers of bad news sometimes, and that affects cost, schedule, and performance occasionally. Okay, so the fact that the program officers really want to engage early with us in supply chain risk is a very good starting point. But in reality, the intelligence specialists that we have supporting the PEOs have great relationships up and down the program offices, and we have access from the engineer working a problem all the way up to the program manager. And that's very beneficial to us as intelligence analysts, because we get a level of granularity at the engineering level that when the program manager presents us with something that they want us to look at and dig deep, we have a reason why. We have kind of like a tactical level of granularity that we can kind of start with when we move forward in our analysis. And so when we start early with the program manager, as far as looking at supply chain risk, we start in their component phase. Sometimes the conceptual phase, when they're looking at ordering parts or equipment for the respective platform. They'll give us a list of potential vendors that they're looking at when they're looking at making contract agreements, and we'll take those prospective vendors and bring it to the SCIF with us, and we'll look through a series of databases, classified databases that we have access to, Exeger being one in particular that we're using, and we'll take a look at those companies. A lot of those databases will have previous business that these companies have engaged in, some of their downstream vendors and subcontracts, and it'll list possible violations, individuals, and previous issues with contracts. That generally it's an excellent opportunity, and it's a funnel for us to kind of look at the wide span of business that's been conducted and that the IC is reported on. We as intelligence officers, we're somewhat constricted to intelligence oversight, so we really focus on that foreign nexus. Sometimes in our analysis, if a U.S. person or a U.S. company is involved, that information is immediately packaged and given off to our CI counterparts, and they handle that through their channels. We specifically focus on the foreign threat within the supply chain. We take that information. We We also provide PRs or formal RFIs through system through the greater IC with specific on specific companies that we're looking at. So we kind of force multiplier and look at the greater IC that has responsibilities for that specific area, whether that be geographic or technology, and they'll look as well and provide reporting to us. We'll package that reporting and we'll provide that to the program manager or the PEO, and inform them as to what, any issues with the potential vendors that they're looking at. At that point, it's up to the individual program manager, program office to decide what kind of COA they want to take with that information. We provide the information. We can kind of give them an assessment on the risk, and then it's the program office makes the determination whether they want to address the issue with the prime, consider alternatives, or assume risk to move forward because of the importance of the component that they're looking at. We also follow up with that. So when we present these reports, it doesn't happen. We don't drop it and that's it, and then people move forward. That generally spirals into several other questions, RFIs, issues, and we'll take those concerns, we'll bring them up to the IC, the intelligence community, and we'll continue that conversation and put in longstanding requirements in which when reporting comes in, maybe on those companies in the process, we'll get reports back, and we'll consistently update our program managers if there is any issues, with that, maybe with that foreign company, that foreign nexus that we identified earlier. And we do that, we'll do that through tailored briefings or tailored products that they request. We meet with the program managers at least monthly with a black book that kind of discusses some of the issues and the RFIs that they have, supply chain being one of them now. And lastly, we'll work even at the engineering level, like I mentioned earlier, full access throughout the programs, and discuss their issues at the real granular level with regard to risk of supply chain. So what vectors are there, or attack vectors into the supply chain? In the last 20 years, the intelligence professionals, like General Myles mentioned earlier, again, we've shifted. We focused on the small war prior, and the counterterrorism threat. Now we're looking at this more strategic threat that we have. But there's one parallel between the two. I remember the adage that the bad guys, they have to be right once, and we have to cover all the bases. Well, there's a parallel there with supply chain as well. And there's a myriad of threat vectors that an adversary will try to inject themselves into our supply chain, depending on the author of the reporting or the article that you want to read. It's too many to count. But I tried to boil down to 4. Number 1 is hardware. So inject themselves into the hardware. I believe General O'Connor mentioned some counterfeit parts earlier. That's a direct threat for the hardware that we look at, and that's reported through our channels and through our databases. Components that are manipulated, so they're made through the process. However, things like chips, you might have tens of people, tens of companies looking at something before they create or they build the fully integrated chip that goes into the supply chain. So, mid-level or early level manipulation of that chip so that it works and it's within parameters, or that part that works within parameters, but it's designed to fail at some point, a trigger point, if you will. Obviously tech theft, and then, actions that are taken to kind of delay development throughout the acquisition or throughout the parts process. The next one is software. So obviously the insertion of malware is a threat vector that adversaries will try to inject themselves into the supply chain process. And they do that for several reasons. Obviously the malware, you think, it's to break the system, deny access, but it's more than that. It's a common thread that I'll mention again on my next vector, but it's to monitor. Okay, so that they'll insert an innocuous piece in the system, and it's not designed to fail. It's not designed to destroy your system. It's designed to monitor capability. It's designed to monitor your frequency that you're pulling this piece of gear out and fixing it, and that information somehow that information can be brought back any means, any type of beacon. That beacon could be a person, maintenance facility, at a maintenance facility. It could be a report back via the software that they're putting on it. The ability to monitor is an issue and an intelligence threat. And lastly, and with software tech theft, obviously. The third thing is insider threat, and that's the biggest issue, the most close hold issue for us, because it involves breaking that internal trust that we have with our contractors and subcontractors, government employees that we trust to go inside the door and work and develop our programs. Poor vetting within government contractors, companies, straight up espionage, and lax compliance is another area within insider threat. So, the contractor has done multiple contracts with the government in the past. They have a good history. However, the components are different and the level of sensitivity is different. And sometimes that contract has a compliance clause with security that isn't quite tailored to what they're making, doing, building, supplying. And that has to be looked at. And that's another vector that can be exploited by our adversary. Lastly, witting and unwitting. You have the bad actor that you think of, the guy that's going to stick the dongle in the computer and make it happen and pull the information out, steal it. But it could be a guy that's unwitting. It could be the pilot that uploads some maps on his tablet innocuously. He's not an intel guy. He did it, and it's a security violation, and that happens. But it's an exploitable situation, and it's a vector on which they can get into our system. Lastly, is the external threat. So the fourth vector is the external threat. So we look at straight up computer network attack, cyber attack, that immediately affects something. There could be a trigger that at a certain time, a certain amount of hours on a part or a component, the trigger will happen and it breaks. And that's an opportunity for another vector for potentially an insider threat or something like that they can pull that information and exploit it at a later time. We're all familiar with hacking. And then foreign integration in certain U.S. systems. So when you have a foreign direct buy system that you're plugging it into a U.S. platform, that's a risk. And I won't go into any further with that because I can talk to you behind the green door, but you guys kind of understand what I'm talking about. But thank you.
Okay, now we'll hear from the industry. Bill Morse.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for having me here, General Myles, and thanks again. Great to see everybody back in town. I guess I'm called on to some of these panels now and then, I guess, because of my proximity, and I'll always be available, General Brown. So thanks for having me back again. Just a little bit about GE. So there's been a lot of changes in GE. I'm just going to recap a few for you at the macro level. So GE as a company is changing its face right now. You may have heard that we're breaking into 3 different sectors: GE Aerospace, GE Healthcare, and GE Vernova, which is our power company. So we spun off GE Healthcare the first week of January, and now we have just GE Aerospace, no longer GE Aviation, and GE Vernova. Vernova will spin off next January, and we will just be a standalone GE Aerospace as the GE moniker, if you will, or the headquarters. GE has enjoyed a 50-year relationship with the United States Army. I was privileged to fly on T-700 powered Blackhawks and Apaches throughout my career. I like to hear warrant officers out in the field say the last thing they worry about when they go out to the aircraft is whether their engine's going to fail in flight. So that's something we're very proud of. We're proud of the next generation T901, which will take place here in the coming months. And we have a very vast global supply chain, and the supply chain is tied really to our commercial business within GE Aerospace. So GE Aerospace, 75% of our business is in the commercial sector. 25% is in the military business. And we're on one supply chain. And as you may have seen during COVID, we had an implosion of the civil aviation business area. We had to lay off 25% of our employees across GE. Most of those were through retirement, so experience went out the door. And this happened also at our suppliers. So you can imagine a small company of maybe 25 individuals who are building specific parts for the legacy or new engines. Losing that type of talent is very unfortunate, but we have turned the corner. The supply chain is being reestablished. Commercial aviation, of course, is coming back. We expect it to be at its 2019 pre-COVID levels sometime in the fourth quarter of this year, 23. So that's great news. That's helping across our supply chain. And again, we all in the power generation and the propulsion industry basically rely on certain forge and casting houses and things of that nature. So it's taking us in a new direction. One of those new directions is additive manufacturing, where we're trying to retain that type of technology in-house to reduce our reliance basically on supply chain and trying to keep that resonant and reduce the risk to our government customer. Again, I'm really happy to be here and look forward to questions from my good friend, General Myles, who he did parachute in to Korea when I was brigade commander with Brigadier General Steve Munt. And it really true. He came in, and then next thing I know, Colonel Derek Paquette, the Apache PM, is showing up in Korea, and I ended up getting him out in a part. So it is kind of like a miracle from the sky, as you said, General O'Connor. He's just done it again and again. So thanks for inviting me, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. For the record, I don't parachute anymore. I subcontract that out. I'm now a contractor. Okay. Dina, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for having me. I just wanted to mention, since we are celebrating the past, that Sikorsky this year is also celebrating a significant milestone. This is the 100th year anniversary of Sikorsky aircraft and Igor Sikorsky's development of the first practical helicopter. So it's a great year for celebrating those milestones. So I want to start with really what do we see as the issues in supply chain right now, and I'll take us back a little bit to what Mr. Bush said this morning, in that companies and OEMs in particular were incentivized really for 25 or 30 years to develop really efficient, low-cost supply chains. Right? That's why you saw globalization. You know, General Myles would have said, you know, I want the bucket of parts as cheap as you can make them. And that's what industry did. And it was not just the defense industry, right? It was the automotive industry. It was the commercial aerospace industry, which is oftentimes, not just in GE's case, but oftentimes also what drives your industrial base. And so that's what led to some globalization, and it led to really lean supply chain. And as long as things were pretty stable and shipping lanes were open, that worked pretty well. And even though that was beginning to change as geopolitical risk increased, what really happened during COVID is we looked and we saw that essentially that system was not tolerant to significant disruptions, which means you had shortages. Our castings and forging capability in the U.S. is a third of what it was, 20 years ago, because a lot of that capacity was built around automotive and commercial aerospace, and they went to someplace cheaper. So essentially, you lost industrial capacity within the United States. So that's an issue and something we need to get after as an industry. And I know, we've done that on castings and forgings. Microelectronics is another one. But some of the disruption made us really look and said, we are too lean, right? So now it's about developing capacity within the supply chain to make us a little more risk tolerant in an environment that is really challenging. So some of the challenges that we would talk about. So the biggest challenge, and I think the one that's going to be hardest to overcome within the U.S., and something you guys talked about with the Army, is do we have the labor pool in the U.S. defense industrial base to really support that capacity? That's a huge issue. I would say it's less of an issue for me and GE because we sort of sit at the top of the labor pool, but we've seen quality issues, not just timeliness issues, but quality issues at tier and sub-tier, first, second, third tier suppliers, really when they just have somebody retire, right? So it is an aged workforce, especially in those sub-tiers. You're seeing a lot of retirements. COVID accelerated that. You had an industry that was leaned out, and we basically have a missing generation. So we really need to get after recruitment, talent development, and not just at the engineering level, but really at the artisan maintenance mechanic level that really fields this industry. That's not an easy thing to get after. Easier to get after, like throw some capital and throw money at it, right? Because your industry will build off that money. But we really have to make sure that we're developing an industrial workforce that will support what we need. So that's one of the issues. The volatility and the risk, whether it's inflationary risks, overall uncertainty, the entrance of private equity into your supply base, which take a look at it, because that has caused your essential, some of your suppliers to shut down or consolidate, so you have fewer suppliers and less competition. Those are all things that have increased volatility domestically that we need to take a look at. There are fewer suppliers now feeding the DoD than there was 10 or 15 years ago. And some of the threats that we talked about, especially in the cybersecurity world, which are real barriers to entry for small businesses to serve the DoD. So we have to be able to balance expanding the supply base to give you more capacity while still taking care of some of the threats. So that's some of the things we see. There's also been geopolitical risk. So, I'm sure GE was the same. We went and built parts in other parts of the world. I think we have to do that because you want dispersed capability with partners, but we also have to make sure we're not dependent. So one of the programs we did on the Black Hawk was basically to resource anything that was produced outside of the United States so that there was a domestic source. That took 2 years. To pull at least so that you would have at least one domestic source, and it is going to be more expensive, right? As we talked about, some of the times we were there because we were more inefficient. So what are some of the things that we're doing? General O'Connor talked a little bit about some of the digital work we're doing. One of the additional reasons we were doing that is because on the Black Hawk you have still paper drawings for some of the older parts. This allows us, 3D models is actually what a lot of new suppliers would require just to even get in the game. So it also is a way to expand capability there. Additive manufacturing is another way that we can do that. Of course, that comes with more risk, right? So we have to get good at sharing data. That's another reason we did the Black Hawk project, right? How do we share data between OEM and the government, whether it's digital models, whether it's data off the aircraft, all of those things in a secure environment will give you some of the capability you want, whether it's expanding the supply base or extending parts on wing. But we need to be able to do that in a secure in a secure way. So those are some of the things we're working on, and happy to take any additional questions.
Okay, thanks, Dina. I'll be the last guy to talk, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Thing I want to mention about supply chain, we know it's an issue, and this is one of those things that doesn't get better with time. And the longer we wait to intentionally get after supply chain issues, the more risk we place on the soldiers. We know that about a lot of things, but this is one we see because we know fundamentally the conditions of the environment that we're going to be operating in is changed. It just has, and we have to adapt to it. The longer we adapt to it, the more risk we have. I've got some thoughts here about the institutional army, what they can do now, okay, to possibly get after this in an intentional way. And all of these matter in terms of being able to drive down the risk to our soldiers. First one I ask is why don't we have a logistics CFT inside of Futures Command? Why don't we have that? And it's not that we're trying to look for the most readiness or for the neatest shiny object. It's about synchronizing, getting after the requirements in a holistic manner, and that's really what Futures Command's trying to do, to shape it. Look at R&D, look at what's out there, and let's see what we can do to buy down this risk that we have to our soldiers. Second one is this General Connor mentions we have a strategic reserve. There was an initiative that General Daly had. Hey, why don't we get all our parts and maintain, recognize the critical parts, and let's have a 90-day supply. Why can't we have a 180-day supply? Why can't we have a 360-day supply? I suspect we're probably going to fly Blackhawks beyond the next 3 decades. Okay, so why not get after this and let's build the strategic reserves that we have. Yes, there's a transportation issue, but there are some things we can do to mitigate the transportation risks we have and being dispersed all over the country, and that is to actually have the asset available so we can move it around in different places. Third thing is we used to have this thing called POMCUS. We used to have this thing that was pre-positioned stocks around the world. There's discussion about it, but if we're serious about this and we're going to be doing this in a multi-domain ops in the Indo-PACOM, what is the plan? Now, I'm on the outside. There may be a very good plan, but it needs to be intentional now to help buy down the risk in terms of shortening the supply chain if we can get the strategic reserves. And then we pre-position these items. They have been invaluable to us. And it's not something we throw away because there are other contingencies that occur besides a global war with China and Russia. And when those things happen, having the parts in the right parts of the world really does drive down our ability to respond in a meaningful manner. Contracting. Long-term contracts. Yes, we try to have compete contracts. We try to have a competition in a period of time so that everybody can participate. But at what risk do we do this? There's a certain period of time that our second and third and fourth tier vendors, we all worry about those second, third, fourth tier vendors, them having the ability to respond in a meaningful way. If you give a longer term contract to a prime, and you give it to them enough to where the second and third tier vendors are giving them funding so they can buy the long-term parts, they're always they're not able to get, and you give them a contract that allows them to go out and buy it. You've now bought down the risk for supply chain for raw materials, and you've provided stability to small businesses. There's a pony in that pile somewhere, and I just think if we get after that in a meaningful way for contracting, extending that period of time, it makes it a lot better for everybody. So I think that's something we need to watch. And yes, there is an urgent vulnerability for U.S. based companies. Dina and I had a conversation earlier, and she's right. It's not just about having a supply chain that's being built in the United States. It's about our most trusted allies and partners that we know are going to be our allies and partners 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And it's about getting that supply chain base built inside of that domain that I just described. What does that mean? You can tell industry to do something, but if you incentivize industry to do it in a way to where they actually increase the priority to have it built inside the United States or our most trusted allies, they will behave in a manner that you do in a contract. And so incentivize them in a way to do that, and you're going to get a different answer. And oh, by the way, there is no free chicken. Last time we checked, the labor rate in the United States is kind of high compared to China and some of the other places. We got to be smart and strategic about it, but at the same time, we don't want to find ourselves in a position of saying, you know, I wish I had been able to incentivize the U.S. industry 10 years ago or 5 years ago. We have that opportunity now. It's about being intentional to go after it. We know DLA is provisioning even more percentages inside of AMCOM. General Connor's got a great plan to work with DLA. We just need to continue that to make sure that they are inside the metrics of readiness that we always do. I know that they're a part of AMCOM when you look at them, but there's an awful lot going inside of DLA, and they need to see what we're doing in the Army and be participating and being just as leaning forward as we're seeing the Army do, because they have an awful lot to do with the parts that we put on our aircraft. Hey, by the way, there is technology out there. Hopefully, if we do some sort of a CFT, there is technology out there today that would help us identify where our parts are. It's one thing to have strategic parts. It's another thing to know where they are. Now, I know that doesn't sound about right, but we put put an Iron Mountain out there in Saudi and in a lot of different strategic places over in the Middle East. You can't do that. But if you can't do that, let's make sure we know in a push of a button, where's all our parts. That's very important. And I think probably there's two other things that jump out at me. One of them is I'm not sure we've got a good plan for this. And that is all of our maintenance units were formed and structured so that we could support an Army that flies 14 hours per aircraft per month. We don't fly 14 hours per aircraft per month in combat. And so, okay, yeah, but this is peacetime, so maybe we can fly more. We're flying 100 hours per aircraft per month in a lot of our aircraft during the fight. For sure, we're flying over our ability to maintain the airplane. So what does that mean, contractors on the battlefield? You can't put contractors out there. I'm not sure what the best solution is, but for sure, it's something we just need to watch. How do you drive down something on parts? Because a lot of times we send parts back that are, guess what? They're still serviceable. Okay. How do you, if you got an aircraft that needs to go on a mission tonight that has a circle red X, or it might be a red X, we're not sure. It would be great to have something called a liaison engineer, which is the Airworthiness Authority guys. They're inside of AVMIC, put them in the formation. That means train them up. And I know it's hard to get people to be liaison engineers and make them deployable. But if you can't provide the parts, if you have to red X an airplane, or you want to understand what the risk is to put that aircraft into a fight, it would be good to know that you have someone inside of your formation that does have the engineering and technical skills to be able to make that risk assessment on whether to go after that soldier in an extremist position. And the last thing is something that is true 30 years ago as it is true today. And that is if one of the things that takes the burden off the supply chain, other things, is your ability for a soldier to troubleshoot. No kidding, troubleshoot. What's wrong? Why is this happening? How do I walk my way through this? We're okay on it. I would tell you we're the turtles with Nikes, because in the civilian world, they have even a harder time to troubleshoot. We do this okay, but we can do it better. And it's something we have to get after in our schoolhouse and our training, and teaching someone to troubleshoot. There's all kinds of skills we have to learn, and there's a lot of them, but I would tell you, I think that's the most significant one. And with that, I think we're going to transition to some questions that we have pending time.
Can I make a point?
Yeah, please.
So one of the things I think that, I did not know AMCOM did when I was a brigade commander, and they're doing it now, is they are doing monthly sit downs with industry. And I think that gets a lot more situational awareness on what's going on in the supply chain. And we can immediately be transparent, because I think a lot of the frustration has been we're not being transparent when we have these supply chain problems is a big nebulous thing. We need to be able to continue this type of open dialogue, whether it's a monthly, quarterly, but I think the monthly rhythms work well to be able to provide that type of visibility. And then if we can get information from CCAD. So we sent a team from GE down to CCAD to watch some of their processes that they were doing as they bring on their new digital tools at CCAD. And I think that goes a long way to helping with part of this supply chain challenge. And we just need to recognize that.
Okay. This one's probably to Dina and Bill. how does industry manage downstream risk with suppliers and vendors, especially overseas companies and their sub-tier suppliers?
So as an OEM, we do significant supplier monitoring, first at our direct tiers and then often at their sub tiers. We often have more influence and ability to resolve technical issues and do so not just with our direct suppliers, but at least one or two. We have a significant monitoring effect, both electronically and boots on the ground. So we have a couple hundred employees deployed into the supply chain at any one time, really monitoring what's going on. And for our most critical or most troubled suppliers, we have permanent presence at their facilities. That may seem like a lot, but given the volatility that we're seeing right now, I would say it's necessary. We also have technical supplier quality as technical engineering working through factory issues, quality issues. And again, we found, especially post-COVID, we had to put boots on the ground. And I would say just at Sikorsky, we probably have 200 people deployed at any one time.
Okay. You got anything, Bill?
No, same here. I would tell you that prior to COVID, I think that we were kind of on an automatic pace with some of our suppliers. And because things have been going well, the processes were established, and then COVID hit and we had the reductions, or different people came on at different technical levels. So we had to double down back and provide people on location. And some of those, in some cases, are now permanent as well. So I think that's a trend across industry, and that we're just we'll keep that going until such a time and make that investment until we're getting satisfactory yield in both quality and delivery from those subs.
Yeah, I would say the one other thing that we do, Lockheed Martin at a corporate level, for key raw material, we buy at a corporate level. So titanium, we buy titanium on a 5-year deal that reduces price volatility, and we provide that to our suppliers. So we're not asking our sub-tiers to go buy raw material because we know that they won't be able to get the price that we can get, and that you'll see a lot higher volatility. So that is the benefit of going with an OEM who has the ability to sign those long-term agreements, and then we just supply the titanium to the suppliers who may machine them. That's one example, but that's another thing that we do to try to buy down on those critical risk items that we see. We may do the same for castings and forgings, buy way ahead, and then provide them to the machining companies, for example.
Okay. Here's another one. How does a new small business LLC with new products compete with established prime vendors, large companies, to help supply chain and modernize the force? Burr, let's go to you, and then if Dina and Bill could talk about what you do to help enable small businesses to support and help you.
Yes. So it's somewhat challenging for small businesses in the aviation arena because we have big major primes. Now each one of those primes has a requirement to have small business competition, and we grade them on that, not only in their proposals but also in their CPARs later on. But we do have quite a few that come to us in AMSA, and we do those through SBIRs traditionally, which it lets us kind of take a look at some of the capability that a small business may have, and maybe a little bit more low risk for the government, so as we can phase that in different phases, SBIRs 1, 2, 3, and then take that into production contract. The other thing for small businesses that I always advise them when they come and talk to me is go sit down with the contracting center small business center, who is there to help them make the agreements to get on partnerships with the big primes, with all the contracts that are going on, like at Redstone, and partner with larger companies that are more established, and then they can get a piece of that business. But probably the most challenging thing that I think the small businesses is when they come to us is they come with a really great capability, but that it's not cycled to when we would use that capability. So, or it's not partnered with one of the customers. So often I see a lot of small business capability that comes in, and I say, okay, where do you think this fits within PO Aviation? And they can't really detail that hey, on 60 Mike, this is a really good fit for this reason, or I've had a conversation with the PM over there. My advice would be to make sure that when you come in and you do those demonstrations, you understand where it fits in the scheme. That way, I can help you push it over to the right place to get it on the platform.
Yeah, and another thing we do in GE is once we've substantiated the small businesses process and we validate that they can in fact produce what we want to the quality standards on time, we provide financing to help them along through some of these times. And I think Lockheed probably has similar programs with their small businesses, but it is an acute problem. I think I was doing some research before this, and about 17,000 small defense businesses have been dropped basically in the last 5 years as a result of COVID, or being boxed out, or not having the amount of financing or certifications. And certifications is another thing that's coming up. I don't know if people understand the cyber maturity model certification that's coming up. That's going to box out a lot of small businesses because of the protocols they're going to have to put in place and the IT investment that they're going to have to make to be able to bid on DoD contracts. So we're working, industry is reaching out, working with OSD, CIO, our contracting officials throughout the services, but this is something that really needs to be taken a hard look at so that the mid and small businesses can at least, first they got to be compliant, and we have to help them in a way to do that as we go forward.
Yeah, it's similar. I sat at a roundtable with DLA and small businesses and talked about this, I don't know, about a year and a half ago. And a lot of the small business said, we'd rather just be a subcontractor than be a direct prime. And part of that has a lot to do with financial and cash flow. So not so much profitability, but a small business can't afford to go 3 or 4 months without trying to make a part and then having a quality issue and not getting paid for that. And some of the things that we learned during COVID, we deployed close to $1 billion into the supply chain to help manage their cash flow and continue to do that. So I may pay my small business faster because I know that if I don't pay them faster, they won't be able to pay their employees. And I think that's tough for them to get through as a DoD prime. There's just not as much flexibility there. And then obviously we really do have to mentor these, Lockheed Martin's going to meet your cybersecurity requirements, right? But we really are going to have to mentor them through the quality requirements, the FAR requirements, the system requirements, and the cybersecurity requirements. And sometimes we have the technical expertise and a quicker technical response that those small businesses are often looking for.
Okay, this is for anyone in the panelists. Is, are you considering going back to just-in-time logistics to reduce stockpiles and share with industry for better parts forecasting and prognostics? Burr, I don't know if you have a thought on that. Are you considering going back to just-in-time logistics to reduce stockpiles and share with industry for better parts forecasting and prognostics?
Yeah, so the good acquisition answer, it depends. It depends on the maturity of the product. It depends on the risk factors that we have placed against it. So some places it makes sense to have stockpiles, and other places we can take risk and do just-in-time delivery on those products. I think that's caught us all in a challenging position in the last couple of years because we took that risk a little bit too far. And when the supply chain challenges hit, we did not have any stockpiles to go. So I think it has to be based on the programmatic risk factors of what we're doing and what the status is of supply chain is for that specific product. It's a risk that we have to develop with our industry partner, and then approve with our boss and our partners in the Sustainment Command.
Good.
Yeah, I would tell you that, just in time kind of worked in Afghanistan and Iraq because it was a pretty set piece for most of the time. But if we see competition and when we talk about it in MDO, at least from what I've read, you need to have just in case. You need to have those pre-positioned stocks that you've talked about because just in case could happen at any time. And we have a 2030 mark on the wall, but in many cases, I've heard some leaders find great suspicion that we have to be ready in 2030 and that timeline is creeping forward to the 2027, 2026 timeline. So, we acknowledge that. And as we work our current contracts, as the T700 IDIQ comes up, we're going to be cognizant of the flexibility in there to be able to react to surges as we move forward over the next 5-year IDIQ.
And I would say two things. First of all, right now, I'm not even willing to take the risk on just in time to my production line. So I'm not sure I'd want to be just in time from a logistics perspective. So, we're not even doing just in time to our production line because of the volatility that exists right now. And when you're thinking about risk, you have to think about how much volatility there is. Right now, we used to update our lead times on our components and on our supply chain about once a quarter. Now we have to do it every month because it's changing that rapidly. And so until we see that volatility come down, we'll certainly continue to do that, even in a production environment that doesn't have the same threats you would in a sustainment environment. But I will say on the prognostics, I think we have to do that whether we're doing just in time or not, right? So we have to get better at doing prognostics, at understanding what's coming off the aircraft. I do think there's opportunity to reduce the maintenance burden, to keep parts on aircraft longer, and that's a part of the risk management and lowering the stock, which is, let's not take a main rotor hub off an aircraft when we know it has double the life that it needs, right? That should allow us the ability to stockpile other parts that we may really need. So I think we have to do both. I don't think it's either or.
No, and brings up it takes to a different thing where Mac and General Connor are pushing, which is this thing on, I used to call it condition-based maintenance, but it really is about predictive and prognostic maintenance here and understanding what's going to break and make a decision prior to and trying to drive you to those points. The more we can prevent ourselves from over-maintaining an aircraft, the better. And it's so easy to over-maintain an airplane because you don't ever want to get to the point of under-maintaining the aircraft. And so you're trying to find that sweet spot and trying to manage the risk. The best way to do that is to have the information available to you so you can actually make it happen and make a good informed decision based on what's happening in the fight today. So, that's a key element that is an underpinning to all the things that we're talking about here. We got 5 minutes left here. So what I'd like to do is give each member of the panel any parting thought, shot, anything you want to bring up. Dina, we'll go to you and work down this way.
Yeah, so I would say, and we didn't talk much about this, but I do think it's important that we build allied capability. You have the advantage when your allies buy the same equipment that you have, because they then want to have that investment in their country. So, I can tell you for the Black Hawk, we probably have some level of sustainment capability in every one of your combatant commands. So we should talk maybe more about how we utilize that, because it's there, and certainly countries want to develop it, and we've done that successfully in a lot of cases, and are certainly willing to partner with you. So I think that's a conversation we need to continue.
Thank you. Bill?
Yes, and we need to stay linked in with General O'Connor's concept of having maintenance-free operation periods as we go into MDO. Whether that's through digital tools and analytics. So we're trying to build that into our current T700 program that we have with DLA, so that we can actually have a dashboard and track to that level where you can see where each engine is in the fleet, and then set the unit so that when they go and deploy, like you say, maintenance-free operations, and then when they come back, you already know what parts need to be available to do the proper service and not just take things off of wing just because there's a time in the book that says I have to remove this particular line replaceable unit at 1,000 hours when it looks fine in the analytical data. So that's what we're trying to strive for and continue to work with that team.
Okay. Frank?
Sometimes the intelligence support to supply chain and acquisition, they don't always act in parallel because, like I mentioned, sometimes we provide bad news or we're presenting risk to a program's cost, schedule, performance, or supply chain. I think it's important that we have to consider and maybe value some of the efforts that we've gone to get to where we're at with some of these programs because, like you mentioned earlier, we can't compete with prices with CONUS builders and things like that. But in the long term, kind of consider if we do go with, faster, cheaper, we're diminishing the capability of the platforms we're trying to develop. And the longevity is not going to be there. So that needs to be in the the consideration when we're developing and when we're considering outsourcing our supply chain and our parts and designs. Thank you.
So supply chain risk is really an opportunity for the government and the OEMs to think and look at how to do things better. The supply chain risks that we've been under, we've been able to have communications with our vendors, our primes and OEMs about IRAD dollars using to solve some of those things to help overcome some of the government challenges to our authorities and our contracts. The way that they're written don't allow us to be as flexible as the OEMs and our partners, our industry partners, can be. So it's been a challenging environment for everybody, but it's also helped us learn how to deal with this a little bit better, look at who has strengths and weaknesses on which sides, as well as to inform, especially for the acquisition community, some of the things that we need to look at holistically to be able to be a little more able to adjust to these types of things at a faster pace, at the speed of our industry partners sometimes. Thank you.
Thanks, Burr. I want to thank the panel members here for supporting us on this tough topic. It's not easy. It's all about going back to what General McCurry had mentioned, and you heard General Taylor talk about. It's about providing support to the probably the most flexible and adaptable arm of our Army, and we have to provide that to them in a way that's seamless and that is where nobody sees a sweat at all. But there's a lot of work that needs to get done. The conditions have changed. We got a different set of threats out to us. And it's about when do we want to decide to do the things we need to do intentionally to get after this. The sooner, the better. With that, General Brown, thank you for all you're doing to set this forum up. And we always got to support those two guys over there in uniform and this great American here, because they have a different set and a different problem. And it's about making sure we support our soldiers tonight. Again, one more time, let's give this panel a round of applause. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate you pinch hitting for this panel. Fantastic panel. As a recovering Army logistician, it warms my heart to hear the military and industry really tackling this problem. So, Mac, some closing remarks from you, if you wouldn't mind.